much for coming. I wish we had more chairs. I hope you'll be comfortable anyway. I'm Shelley Rosenblum, curator of academic programs here at the Belkin Gallery, and I'm pleased to welcome you to an evening of performance with Eleanor Antin and in conversation with Michael Morris and with you, the audience. Thank you for coming. Eleanor Antin, one of the most prolific artists of the past 4 decades, is a seminal figure in the history of performance art. She works in a variety of media, including photography, video, film, performance, installation, drawing and writing, using historical settings and allegory, mythical characters, fictional personas, and alter egos to construct metaphors about identity and the contemporary world. For Antin, questions of subjectivity and otherness have led to an ongoing inquiry into the diverse formations and representations of identity. As early as 1965, Antin explored the so-called essence of identity in her Blood of a Poet box, a work in the Fluxus mode containing 100 glass microscope slides of poet's blood in a wooden box. The work refers to Jean Cocteau's 1930 film, Le Sang d'un Poète, which exalted the fantastical inner life of the creative artist, but by contrast, Antin's blood smears reveal nothing about the individual poets. Concluding that biology was neither identity nor destiny, Antin began to investigate identity as a confluence between self-definition and the forces of social interaction. After moving to San Diego in 1969, Antin produced California Lives, a series of portraits of individuals, some real and some invented, each consisting of artifacts of consumer or domestic culture and a typed character sketch. Although these portraits were cryptic, the rebus-like configuration anticipated the narrative structure and psychological exploration that dominates her later work. Central to this exhibition's state of mind are questions around the possibility of women's self-representation, one of the defining issues for feminist artists struggling for recognition and self-definition during the 70s, and particularly for Antin, who actively helped forge the link between conceptualism and feminism. In the gallery tonight, you can see 2 of Antin's works, Representational Painting and 100 Boots. Given that women were seeking political emancipation and agency, just as the privilege of subjectivity and authorship was being disclaimed within artistic and intellectual circles, what was at stake was not simply the right to reassert privilege, but the need to forestall closure on subject-centered inquiry itself. In Antin's case, this inquiry took shape through her strategic use of performance to problematize subjectivity by treating it as an unstable category tenuously negotiated within both private and public structures. She created a gallery of performance personae derived from a complex blend of autobiography and fiction that she refers to as, quote, a mythological machine, capable of calling up and defining myself as the ballerina, the king, the black movie star, and the nurse, unquote. By slipping into and out of these characters, Antin confounds the distinctions between art and life, fiction and reality, acting and being. The autobiographical origins of Antin's characters bind them to her, but no matter how complete the transformation, a gap persists between herself and her personae that signify her subjectivity not as being, but as the agency of being. Antin has had many solo exhibitions, including the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney Museum, and a major retrospective at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Her works are in many collections around the world, including Tate Modern, MoMA, the Whitney, and the Art Institute of Chicago. She has performed at the Venice Biennale Documenta 12. Antin received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Women's Caucus of the College Art Association in 2006, and an honorary doctorate from the School of Art, Institute of Chicago in 2009. She is an emeritus professor of visual arts at UC San Diego. Eleanor Antin's visit is supported by the Department of Art History, Visual Art, and Theory's Distinguished Visiting Artist Program, which is made possible by the generous support of the Rennie Collection. We thank you. Tonight, Antin will be reading/performing from her latest project, Conversations with Stalin, a quintessentially New York story by an iconic California artist. Thank you.
I was brought up in New York many, many years ago by Polish Jewish immigrant communists, or Russian. They preferred being called Russians because they thought Poles were low class and Russians were high class, because they were high culture. Okay. I'm not talking about the efficacy or truth of this. I don't know exactly why I started doing this memoir. I think partly because I was very tired of dealing with people all the time. I had spent the last decade, the first decade of the 21st century, doing these huge photos of ancient Greece and Rome, or shall I say, a kind of mixture, you might say, of, oh, there is an echo, isn't there? Is it okay? Because to me it sounds like an echo, but if it's all right. And I've been doing these big, sort of seeing this vision I had actually a few months before 9/11, and we shot the week before 9/11, of my whole area in Southern California. I live in the country, but it's near La Jolla and all these very affluent communities. And I saw them suddenly as extremely vulnerable and waiting, as it were, like Pompeii, for a fate that they had no idea was going to strike. And I believe now we all know that anything can strike at any time. I think we're all hopefully beginning to live with that. I guess everybody lived with that vulnerability. I mean, people knew, because for one thing, you're going to die, you don't know when. But there's always wars and disasters. But I think the fact of climate change and the intense vulnerability of the Earth has sort of changed things in some ways. It made our mortality like something we live with at every moment consciously. I just came from, I was supposed to be reading this whole memoir in 4 different venues in New York the week that Sandy struck. So I'm especially sensitive to the way out of the blue something can come, and I always knew that. I had a fear when I was a kid, always. I was afraid to walk under windows, which is, of course, difficult if you live in New York, because, you know, but I thought that a typewriter would fall down on me. Now, you don't even know what a typewriter is, some of you, but this would be, and this is before an electric typewriter, this would be a big Underwood thing, and that's what they were like. And, of course, it's a little impossible, because what would a typewriter be doing on a windowsill? But it was a fear of mine, and I think there's something psychologically curious about that, since I've also always been a writer as well as an artist, because I think they go together. I think whatever medium you need, whatever you have to use to do what you want to do, is fair game. And this is called, this memoir, I'm going to read you about maybe 4 chapters. It's called Conversations with Stalin. Is there anyone who doesn't remember Stalin? It's okay, you don't have to be ashamed. You know, he was no hotshot, you know, even though my family thought he was the cat's pajamas. Okay, he was one of the great dictators of the 20th century. Okay. Even though in my family he was a hero. Okay. I have a few lines I just want to read to give you some background. I never told anybody, but Comrade Stalin and I were very close friends. For years, we used to meet up in Central Park and talk about stuff. My mother would have been jealous, so I never told her. She'd have charmed him into being her friend, not mine anymore. I knew her too well. You have to admit, though, you could hardly blame her. He would have been such a great catch. He probably had access to money, too, though here I wasn't so sure. He never bought me an ice cream cone or a hot dog when we walked in the park, so I don't know whether he had rubles or dollars in his wallet, But maybe it really didn't matter. Money was money. You could probably exchange rubles in a bank the same way you exchange French franc. I didn't tell my sister either. I didn't trust her. She might have turned him into the FBI. And my father would have warned me not to mingle with such highfalutin folk. I might get into the newspapers. Stay away from greatness. Hide. You'll only get hurt, little Ellie. It's the way of the world. So I kept my secret for years. It was fun to have a secret anyway. I felt like a conspirator, like the Count of Monte Cristo or Jean Valjean. And every chapter ends with a conversation in Central Park that I have with my dear friend, Comrade Stalin. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Since I'm at an art gallery that is associated with the university, and I spent 30 years teaching at UCSD, I'm going to read a piece about, well, you'll see what it's about, but I think it's probably of some interest to young people who are hoping or thinking of becoming artists. It's called Sisters. When my sister was born, my mother fell into such a terrible depression that the baby had to be temporarily placed in an orphanage, and I was sent to a That's my fucking phone. I'm sorry. Oh, it's not yours? It's somebody? Oh, okay, fine, okay. Actually, mine's jazz. Mine is actually a very nice one. If it happens, okay. When my sister was born, my mother fell into such a terrible depression that the baby had to be temporarily placed in an orphanage, and I was sent to a charity camp run by nuns. In those days, the sisters wore the old traditional black habits with that starched white brim on their hoods, which looked like it would draw blood if you ran your hand over it. I was 5 years old and had never been away from home before. Every morning, they served us oatmeal. I liked cereal, but they put maple syrup in it. That was disgusting. At home, we ate cream of wheat or wheatina with butter and milk. I cried, I don't want that brown gooey stuff. But that's what everybody had, and I was going to have it too. When they tried to push a spoonful into my closed mouth, I turned away and it splattered on my cheek. Then I vomited into the bowl. Every morning, I vomited into the bowl. Until one morning, a pissed-off sister warned me that if I vomited again, I'd have to eat it. I wasn't stupid. I never vomited again. But I still wouldn't eat the brown goo. After breakfast, the kids lined up to go to the bathroom. A sister checked that each toilet had number 2 in it. That's what we called it at home. Number 2, pee was number 1. I sat in my stall and tried to go. The other toilets were flushed one by one until I was the only one left in the bathroom. The sister poked her head behind my little butt to see. No doo-doo yet? There was disappointment in her voice. She felt bad. I tried to doo-doo for her, but I couldn't. I was very small. My feet didn't reach the floor. I sat on that toilet until 3 o'clock in the afternoon because I couldn't doo-doo. It must have been that late because the children had had their lunch already and they were back from the playground for milk and cookies. The toilet sister finally let me go. You'd better doo-doo tomorrow, she warned. I don't know if I did or didn't, but that day I hadn't eaten anything, so even though I was bad, they let me have a container of milk and a cookie. I hope it was an Oreo or a chocolate chip. I still love Oreos and chocolate chips, but I really think it was a vanilla cream, and I hate vanilla cream. Every day I fell in the playground and my knees would bleed. So every day they sent me to the nurse sister. She said I was using up all her bandages. There would be none left for the good children. A good little child would be without a bandage because I was stealing them. I desperately didn't want to go to that wretched infirmary where she always stuck a thermometer in my mouth, even though I was only there for bleeding knees. But I couldn't stop falling. I held onto the chain link fence for dear life. If I didn't move, I wouldn't fall. But I couldn't help it. I would forget and run. I was small and wiry and loved to climb all over the monkey bars. They got so mad at me once that they punished me and sent me to bed without supper, even though the sun was still shining. I remember a big boy, I think he was a teenager, undressing me and putting me to bed early. I was standing on the bed and he was taking off my underwear to put on my pajamas. He wasn't a mean boy like other boys. He was very nice and very serious. I must have liked that punishment because I was happy. The sun shone all around us. I didn't feel bad at all. My therapist says this is completely impossible, that no nuns would give a teenage boy the job of putting a little 5 or 6 year old girl to undress her and put her to bed. I think she's right, but this is how I remember it. That weekend, my father came to visit, and I screamed so hard for him to take me home that I had a choking fit and couldn't breathe. He looked desperately sad, like he was going to cry, but he didn't know what to do. I was marched off in a line with the other kids, and I didn't stop screaming, "Take me home, Daddy. Please take me home. Please, please." The next day, my mother called and demanded that they send me home immediately. "But she's having such a good time," the phone sister said. "She's such a cute little thing." "She's miserable," my mother said. "Send her home today or I'll call the police." They packed a little box with my clothes and put me on the train. I cried with relief when the train pulled into Penn Station and my mother was there waving. She couldn't believe how skinny I was. And we went off to have a big sundae with lots of whipped cream and a cherry on top. But she really was ill, so they sent me to stay with my Aunt Gertie and Uncle Willie. Gertie played mahjong all day long, so my teenage cousin Herbert took care of me. He used to take me to the schoolyard where he played stickball with the other big boys, and I sat by the fence and watched them play or read Nancy comics. The boys were nice to me. They gave me candy. They called me the team mascot and said I won games for them. Since Aunt Gertie didn't get home from her mahjong games until after dark, Herbert must have fed me and got me ready for bed. This is where I made the change. It turned into a great summer. I think it was Herbert. And I think I really enjoyed it. And I think there was an erotic something or other, which I liked. When school started, I went home, and a couple of months later, my mother was well enough to care for the baby, and they brought my sister home too. I paid no attention to her, except that since we shared a bedroom, her diapers stunk up the place. I managed to ignore my sister until she started kindergarten. Then I had to look after her when we crossed the streets after school. What a drag for an important 4th grader to be followed by a kindergarten baby. I made believe I didn't know her except when I had to walk her across the street. I was such a pill that I probably only waited for her at the curb because if a car ran her down, my ass would be grass. But she was no wimp. She was equally disgusted by me and always dragged her feet as far behind as she could. She tried to disassociate herself from us. She was a marauder in the Garden of Eden I shared with my mother as the oldest child, the first daughter. When she was only 3 years old, she already thought we were a pair of creeps. In the park, she'd slip away when nobody was looking and be found later drinking from the stone water fountain, oblivious to our frantic worry. She was always looking for an escape. But by this time, she was already a famous figure in the family. Even I was impressed. She was a magician and the heroine of a ghost story. It all began when she was about 2. My mother was in the kitchen peeling potatoes when she heard Hot Cross Buns playing loud and clear on the piano in the living room. I had just started piano lessons and was learning to play that piece, but I was in school. Somebody must have sneaked in through the fire escape. But why would the idiot give himself away by playing the piano? He was obviously a crazy man or a ghost, but my mother didn't believe in ghosts. She picked up a kitchen knife and crept into the living room. There was nobody there except my sister, who couldn't quite reach the keys, but was playing Hot Cross Buns perfectly. Better than me, for sure, and laughing with pleasure all the way. That was the beginning of Marcia the Genius. Everybody in the family invented games for her. Play this song, Mashallah. Play these chords. She had perfect pitch and could play anything, even down in the deepest bass. Now nobody wanted me to dance ballet for them anymore, or recite Thomas Hood's The Song of the Shirt by heart. Stitch, 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 in poverty, hunger, and thirst. This is the song of the shirt. A proper poem for a good little communist. I always recited with expression, and I enjoyed the applause, though I don't remember if Marcia enjoyed her applause. Somehow I think she didn't, or else she was indifferent. She was still too busy trying to get away. But I remember a couple of years later when her little feet still didn't reach the floor from the piano stool, and she was playing a Mozart sonata in a concert at the 2nd Street Music Settlement School when she got lost somewhere near the end and forgot how to get out. She didn't skip a beat. She was already an escape artist. She just improvised her own Mozart with obvious pleasure. I was in the first row, close enough to hear her giggling. She was a perfectly plausible Mozart, going on for several minutes until she found an ending. Nobody in the audience knew the difference except for her teacher, Miss Valentine, who was trying desperately to stifle her laughter behind her program. Later, Marcia studied with two crazy German despots, the Spielters. She even went to their summer music camp on an island somewhere in New Hampshire, for free, of course, because we didn't have the money to pay for her. Without even asking, she got away from the hotel. My mother was in the hotel business. Just like that, it wasn't fair. I was really jealous then, even though she had to practice on a dummy piano for 8 hours a day to perfect her fingers. With all the little prodigies banging away at their Beethoven sonatas all at once, I suppose the cacophonous sound would even break the formidable eardrums of those Nazis, Hetty Spielter and her brother. Mother was sure they were Nazis. To her, all Germans were Nazis. Several of their geniuses did commit suicide eventually, though most of them chose instead to run away from music like the plague, which Marcia did too. But in those days, she couldn't get away from anybody yet. She was their great white hope, and they weren't about to let her escape. So when our parents finally split, the Spielters offered us a free apartment on the top floor of their brownstone off Riverside Drive in the 60s. It was a big, gloomy, spiderwebby kind of place with endless busts of Beethoven glaring down at you, and great silent grand pianos, most of them dummies, in every room. It was a haunted house. What couldn't I discover there? I loved it. But Marcia didn't. Then, broke as we were, Mother turned down the offer. Did she realize it wouldn't be a healthy place for her youngest daughter? Or was she afraid of losing her difficult child to the fierce Spielters, whom she was certain were anti-Semites anyway? I didn't give a shit about anyone else. I was seduced by the mystery of that house and was heartbroken not to get the chance to live in it. But Marcia was relieved, though she never tried to influence the decision in any way. She must have known already that Mother would only do what she wanted to do. Was my cynical sister surprised not to get sold for a free Midtown apartment? She never told me. And since she's dead now, I can't ask her. But some years later, I did ask Comrade Stalin why he thought Marcia ran away from music. She was given a gift, I said, and she turned it down. Why would she do that? He waved his hand in disdain. Maybe she didn't care about such gifts. The piano is a solo instrument. Maybe she would have preferred playing the violin in an orchestra. It is a more communal activity. I hadn't thought about that. Well, in music and art high school, she did quit the piano, but she didn't take up the violin. She played the trombone. See, he said with evident self-satisfaction. But I always thought she specifically chose the trombone to insult the piano. Like it was a conversation she had with herself. Blow on it, and it sounds like a Bronx cheer or a fart. Don't be vulgar, he made a face at me. Your sister chose an instrument of the people. She left her decadent instrument for young ladies in silk dresses. Trombones belong to the true folk, your American Negroes. Their horns sing with life. She wanted to sing with them. But I wasn't convinced. My sister was a very private person, comrade. She was something of a hermit. She didn't seem to like people very much. Now that I think about it, why didn't she choose the cello? It's so masturbatory. He made a face. He did not like the way the conversation was going. I do not approve of that activity, he said with distaste. It is not communal. We were quiet for a while as we walked down towards the lake. I think Comrade Stalin was embarrassed. We watched the kids floating little paper boats on the water while the ducks looked on in disdain. It was fall and the leaves crunched under our feet. I thought we'd better get out of that line of conversation. Well, I said, God gave her a gift and she refused it. He glared at me. There is no God. Shit, it wasn't my day. I know that, comrade. It's only a manner of speaking. She did have a talent she was born with. It came from somewhere. I was just using God as a convenience, as a metaphor. You are always over-dramatizing, he said with irritation. When I was a child, I sang vespers with a high, sweet alto. People came to church just to hear me. My little so-so will be a bishop, my mother boasted. You'll see. At night I sang at weddings, made a few kopecks even, though I was just a boy. His voice became querulous, cranky. So your sister had a talent, perfect pitch, like Trotsky making eloquent speeches, always with a white flower in his lapel, always the dandy. Who did he think he was, a Frenchman? And Arthur Miller writing good plays. These are talents. Lots of people have them. Don't make so much of them. But I knew better. I had talents, a number of them. Stalin was right. Lots of people did have talents. What my sister had was a gift. Wherever it came from, she was given that gift and she turned it down. That refusal changed the whole course of her life and eventually killed her. It was as mysterious as a glorious sunset and as lethal. My sister died about 10 years ago, and I've somehow been thinking about her quite a lot lately. And when I was reading in St. Louis, her daughter, my niece, her only child, came, and I asked her afterwards, because she lives in St. Louis, and I asked her afterwards, what did you think of what I wrote about Marcia? And she said, no, it had nothing to do with that. It's nothing. She refused to admit this, but I'm an artist, and I know my sister, and I know it killed her. It certainly destroyed her life. She substituted 3 packs of cigarettes a day for him. Okay, geography is another chapter. Both my parents were Marxists, so naturally they were atheists. Ever since I was a little kid, I knew that God never came to our house. We never went to his, not like the Italian kids at my block. They could never get away from him. Apparently he spied on them all the time, like Senator McCarthy spied on us. If those kids did bad things, they got damned. That is pretty serious stuff. They burn in hell, and that's not for just a couple of days. They keep burning forever and ever. Would they get all black and ashen and curl at the edges like burning paper? That part wasn't too clear. But I was jealous of the confirmation girls. They strutted around in frilly white dresses like little brides. And when their parents weren't looking, the boys in their shiny black suits would stick out their tongues at the Jewish kids playing ball. Later, after church, they came back and chased us off the sidewalk, chanting, "Me and my friend Annie, we come from Italy. We shine of the shoes and kill of the Jews, me and my friend Annie." So sometime back then, when I was in 2nd or maybe 3rd grade, I began to feel cheated. Who do they think they are anyway, those Italian kids? They're dumb, too. They aren't in the smart classes like the Jewish kids. They won't even go to college. They'll be workers. The workers are good. But they wouldn't be the good ones. They'd be scabs, probably. They'd cross picket lines. They'd be in cahoots with the FBI. So who would be the good workers if all the Jews were in college? All I needed was a Bible, and I'd show them. Unfortunately, we didn't have one in the house, not even an abridged one. We had several dictionaries, though. I chose the blue Webster over the red Thorndike. It was fatter with gold lettering on the cover and very delicate, almost transparent paper. So every Sunday morning, I put on my mother's heels and a kerchief on my head and hobbled around my room like a little old lady going to church. I would open the dictionary to religious words and read them aloud in a slow, serious, sonorous voice like a priest or a rebbe. I looked up at the sky a lot to make sure God was listening. First, I read the word so God would know what I was talking about. Then I read the full definition, sometimes a short one, but sometimes quite long. I read the definitions of God, Jesus, church, prayer, sermon, graveyard, whatever religious word I knew. Then I looked up at the sky, put down the book, clasped my hands to my breast, and said, Amen. A long, drawn-out, sincere amen was very important. It meant the end, period. It closed the book. Literally, as I picked up my Bible and walked out of church, meaning I walked around the room once, then went out the door, put the dictionary back in the bookcase in the living room, and came back to my room to jump back into bed and play with my paper dolls or read a book or maybe feel myself up. Though that wasn't such a good idea on a Sunday morning when everybody was home. My mother could come in and catch me. My family wasn't big on privacy. Back in the shtetl in Poland, my father's father was a famous atheist, sort of like a desperado, I think. Women covered their children's faces when he passed in the street. So we went to America where people had more education and didn't worry about such things. They made money instead. My father likes to tell this story. He's proud of his father, even if he didn't make any money in America. But my mother's father was just the opposite, a great Hasidic wise man, Reb Shmuel Mecher, with a long white beard. People came to him to solve their problems, like the baker's wife who wouldn't clean the house. The baker is distraught. There are tears in his eyes. What does she do all day while he slaves over the hot ovens? Sits at the table and gorges on his food? What are you dreaming about with your head in your hands, you Korva, he shouts. Warsaw? Are you dreaming of Warsaw? Who are you to dream of Warsaw? Or the brother-in-law robbing the poor widow of her last 5 rubles. He owes it to me, that rotten husband of hers, he rages. He had no right to die. He still owes me 100 rubles. I have 9 children. They don't have shoes on their feet. She is pulling out her hair in despair. They are hooligans, your children, she screams. Look, Reb Shmulmeiko, my children, are they not angels? The tears run down her worn cheeks. They have only 2 pairs of shoes. 2 pairs of shoes for 5 children. It is a shanda for the Jews. Aren't you ashamed for the Poles to see? My poor Moishe will turn over in his grave. How can you do this to your brother's children, you stinker? I hear their voices shouting in my head, their hands imploring Reb Shmulmeiko to translate the word of God and vindicate them. One night, when she was very small, my mother peeked inside the window of Crazy Pinchuk's house, and there he was, Crazy Pinchuk, lying on the kitchen table while her father shouted strange words at him. But her mother came and dragged her away. Don't ever tell anybody, she whispered, slapping the little girl's face for emphasis. He is exorcising the bad demon in poor Pinchuk's broken body. Now we will go to school and read books like the other children. Will he do arithmetic too, my mother marvels? This is a mixed blessing. She won't be able to steal poor Pinchuk's pennies anymore when he can count them correctly. Please be to God, her mother says. Please be to God. But God is like chocolates. He can explode gloriously in your mouth, but even if you're careful and nibble at him in small bites, sooner or later, usually sooner, he's gone, leaving you lonely and forlorn. Some years later, when I was in high school, I remember desperately falling down on my knees when I thought I was pregnant and begging God for help. I don't remember who the father was, and maybe I didn't even know. But when I missed a period, I was terrified the way we all used to be in those days when abortions were done in back alleys with slimy amateurs and dirty knives. Now, I didn't know anything about that, really. I had never had an abortion or known anyone who had. And for all I knew, you could find a decent doctor willing to help a poor girl for $100. But that was a lot of money in those days. I certainly didn't have it. I only got 75 cents an hour for babysitting, and I was saving for an Angora sweater. My parents wouldn't kill me, but they'd yell, and my mother would wring her hands and cry, though if I worked it right, maybe I could taunt my father into hitting me, and my mother would rush to protect me while I crouched on the floor protecting my face, and she would call him a brute, and suddenly he was the bad one, not me. But in the end, they'd helped me to get a safe abortion. I knew that. I was 16 years old, for God's sake. But they had their own troubles, and I was ashamed for them to know I wasn't a virgin anymore. So better all around if God could help. I slipped down to the floor, scraping my knees and clasping my hands to my chest, the way I used to do in my old church days, and begged for help. Please, please help me, God, and I will believe in you and not deny you anymore. I was getting carried away, crying and pleading, rather enjoying myself, when I felt a soaring, passionate rush in my body, and to this day, it's still miraculous to remember, but suddenly blood started streaming down my legs and my period came back with a bang. Now that I think about it, maybe it was a miscarriage, but I didn't know about such things then. It's bizarre how much we didn't know in those days. And either way, it was a miracle, my own 100% miracle. I thanked God in a rather noble, grand tone, got up and cleaned myself and inserted a sanitary napkin into my pants, the way we did in those days. And I kept saying, thank you, God, thank you. And then I was in the midst of a moral dilemma, big time. Every bone in my body wanted to figure it was a natural occurrence. He didn't have anything to do with it. He never heard me. He wasn't there. He didn't exist. And I should just figure I was lucky. Maybe I didn't calculate the time right for my period. I never did anyway. But that seemed like such an ungrateful, unmannerly response. It was ungentlemanly. I had called on him, and he answered. It didn't matter whether it was him or science. You promised to believe in him. You said you wouldn't deny him. So now that your prayer was answered, God damn it, you better believe in him. There was no other way to keep my dignity, my self-respect. And for a couple of weeks, I stuck to it. But then life went on, and I got busy with other things. He got further and further from the place where I was, and soon I forgot all about him. So maybe God came to me once, and it was a good thing too, even if he didn't stay so long. Like visiting my mother in the Alzheimer's home years later. Better a short visit than none at all. An even shorter meeting that I'll never forget was with this sexy guy on McDougal Street. He was tall and handsome with black curly hair and a cute accent. He liked me. He definitely liked me. It was kismet. Turned out he was going to NYU, and I was majoring in cafeteria at CCNY, where my friends, the poets and artists, spent the days cutting classes and smoking over dreadful coffee. This made him laugh, and he talked about his classes, which I said I wouldn't cut either if I had to pay such serious tuition money. And then he started complaining about the Jews in his classes. There are so many, you can't get away from them. I never know where to sit. I started to laugh. Hey, this is New York City after all. Hey, I said, I'm Jewish. He swirled to face me. No, you're joking. He stared hard at me. I thought, this guy is devouring my face. He's serious. What is this all about? No, I said. This was beginning to feel really weird. No, I'm Jewish. I've always been Jewish. I grinned. And I'm not even in any of your classes. Why wasn't he laughing? Now that I thought about it, I couldn't place his accent. Actually, he sounded kind of Israeli. So where are you from? I yelled as he ran across the street and continued walking on the other side. I'm Egyptian, he shouted and began to curse me. I hate you. Israel should be blown off the map. You stole Palestine. You're a thief, a murderer. What was he saying? What did I have to do with Israel? I'm not an Israeli, I called out to him. Can't you tell a New York accent when you hear one? He continued to curse me, and I began to feel really weird. This guy is serious. But I gave it one more try. Hey, calm down. I didn't do anything to any Palestinians, I yelled. I don't even know any Palestinians. And if they're like you, I don't want to know any. I still couldn't see what all the fuss was about. In my world, politics was about the Korean War and the red baiting of Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs and that liar Whittaker Chambers and the evils of HUAC, the House Un-Americans Activity Committee. This guy was attracted to me. I was attracted to him. What did all that stuff so very far away have to do with me? He continued yelling all the way down the street. Finally, I stopped declaring my innocence and turned around and walked back to the Figaro and ordered a cappuccino. Hey, didn't you just leave with that sexy guy, the friendly waitress asked? Then I realized I was trembling. My hand shook as I drank the coffee and I spilled some on my white blouse. The next day I asked Comrade Stalin what had happened. Why do I feel so creepy and angry? He sighed. How many times have I told you, little Ellie, the personal is always political? But I was still jumpy. I couldn't be satisfied with slogans this time. So it's just that our politics are different? That coming from a different place he couldn't care less about Senator McCarthy and Roy Cohn? Do not disparage geography, little Ellie. Geography is like class. They both cause wars. But he isn't a Palestinian, and I'm not an Israeli. They aren't even our wars. We wandered silently for a while. I reached for a cigarette. I was still very nervous. Look, I tried to explain in more detail. I was treated like shit by some rude creep who was a guest in my country and a guest in my city, and frankly, a guest in my neighborhood. If Mickey knew what a creep he was, he wouldn't serve him at the Figaro. He'd throw him out. This guy could be dangerous. He looked like he wanted to kill me. He should be deported. Good. You are learning. He patted my head affectionately. You have been insulted, dear Ellie. My heart goes out to you. If you were in my country, I would send such a rogue to Siberia. He comes from a warm country. He will languish in the gulag. He will freeze to death. His heart will break in the snow. He shakes his head sadly. That is the trouble with democracies. You aren't suspicious enough. You don't know how to protect yourselves. You let in all the riffraff. But I can't stop. I'm still going at it. There's more to this than meets the eye, even the wise eye of Comrade Stalin. You know what I'm most pissed about, Comrade? That I tried to explain myself. I must have sounded so apologetic. I should have told him to go fuck himself, don't you think? Little Ellie, what have I told you about self-expression? It is wasteful. It goes nowhere. Just report him to the authorities. They will know what to do. He slid his finger across his throat in the age-old gesture. But I couldn't stop. I should have told him that my mother's whole remaining family is in Israel, that her sisters are Sabras who have lived in Haifa since the 20s, that my cousin Amos is a colonel in the Israeli army. I hope they kill that creep. Comrade Stalin smiles and hugs me. Oh, they will, little Ellie, someday, sooner or later. This fellow will not sit still. He will not spend his afternoons drinking tea and disputing the fine points of art and history. One day he will die earlier than he was meant to. One way or another. That was how many years ago? The world doesn't change. Okay. I'll read you one of my favorite chapters. Luck and Other Imponderable. He looked like a Raphael angel. Medium height, slim, yellow hair falling deftly over his left eye like silk. He'd melt the heart of Herr Aschenbach on the beach at Venice. The poor man would take one look at him and dissolve in tears. But that night, he just walked out of somebody's dream and up a flight of stairs to his tiny apartment in Minetta Lane and made love to me smoothly and without sweat. Afterwards, I sat in the little bathtub while he chatted with the bleached blonde middle-aged neighbor from upstairs who smoked endless cigarettes and seemed determined not to leave. I was ashamed to ask him to bring me my clothes. I didn't want to call attention to them. They were cheap and not too clean. I didn't trust him. I suspected he would say, "I don't know where they are, Eleanor. Just come in and get them yourself." They were lying all over the living room floor. I was ashamed to pick up the pieces stark naked. It didn't matter that I worked as an artist model to make extra money and was used to being naked in front of people who studied me over an easel or while kneading clay on armatures. They all said I had classic curves. Everybody wanted me for a model. But he didn't have an easel in front of him or a paintbrush in his hand. And anyway, he was naked too, smoking at ease, chatting with the neighbor who didn't blink an eye. I could see her through the bathroom door, blowing smoke rings. When I left the safety of the tub, she would look coolly at my body and judge me harshly. Even if one of my stockings was next to her shoe, she wouldn't pick it up and hand it to me. I would have to bend down and crawl under her chair to get my own stocking. Then I'd have to go searching for the other one. They probably smelled, too, because I'd been wandering around in them all day. I sat in the tub. The water went from warm to cool. I began to shiver. I was hungry. She left an hour later. He came in. "Why didn't you join us?" he asked curiously. "Aren't you cold?" I burst into tears. "You are such a shit," I screamed, jumping out of the tub and running into the living room to gather up my clothes. My blouse was squeezed into her chair. She hadn't even bothered to remove it. She just sat on it the whole time, her big butt pressed comfortably onto my new white blouse. Now it was wrinkled with a warm body smell from her fat butt. "The bitch," I moaned. "Look what she did to me." I grabbed a handful of peanuts from the dish by her chair and stuffed them hungrily into my mouth while I hustled up my things and ran back into the bathroom and threw on my clothes. He stood in the doorway, languorously smoking. "What's got into you?" he inquired curiously. "Do you want to go downstairs to the cafe? Are you hungry? Is that it?" "You slept with her, didn't you?" I shrieked. "You fucking bastard, you slept with that old bitch and she sat on my clothes." "So what?" He looked genuinely surprised. "So I sleep with her sometimes. So she came down to see if I was free. I like her. She's a good lover. Older women often are." "She's a vulgar, goddamned floozy," I shouted. His nose wrinkled in distaste. "I sleep with your best friend. She's my girlfriend. You knew that. But you came on to me even though Joni is my girlfriend. Who's the bitch here?" I could feel my face heat up with shame. "Don't you dare tell her," I warned him, "or I'll sneak in here when you're sleeping and kill you." His beautiful eyebrows rose in fake astonishment. "Really? And supposing you could get in without waking me, how would you kill me?" I was humiliated. I sounded so stupid. But he seemed genuinely interested. He looked at me as if I were a fetal pig in science class. "I'd knife you. I'd stab you with that kitchen knife," I screamed. "The one we used for the salami?" He looked dubious. "I don't think it's sharp enough. Here, try this one." He opened a drawer in the little cupboard and took out a sharply serrated knife and offered it to me. "I'm tired of you women anyway," he whispered. "You'll be doing me a great favor. It will kill my father, too, so you'd get 2 birds for 1. I grabbed my bag and my books and rushed out of there, but I was already sorry. He was so pretty. His father was a famous art historian who was 90 years old and knew Bernard Berenson personally. His son was brought up in Rome and Florence and visited his mother on a Greek isle on school vacations. I'd never been out of the Bronx or Manhattan except to go up to the Catskills to work in the hotel. I don't think I had even been to Brooklyn, though I'd modeled for Bob Gwathmey and my cousin Chaim Gross in Great Neck. And one summer I spent 2 weeks being an au pair on Fire Island, where I got fired after I scoured the salad bowl like a peasant instead of wiping it with a rag so the flavors and smells of past salads remained in the age-old wooden bowl. Nina had been in despair. My beautiful salad bowl, she pressed it to her heart, tears rolling down her prematurely wrinkled face. "How could you do that to me? You soaked it. You used Brillo," she shrieked. "You did it on purpose. You hate me. You're jealous because I have a husband on Broadway and I go to parties with Wyszynski and sat next to Molotov once." I took her little son out to the beach and we walked along the water's edge. A full moon hung in an enormous sky, but I was a snail crawling in the sand, a crab without a shell, just a low-class girl from the Bronx. A few days before, I got picked up on my day off by a prematurely balding German with a cigarette holder. We went to visit his friend, an old French guy, very sophisticated if somewhat scrawny in a bathing suit. He took one look at me and opened his arms in delight. "Gigi," he cried. "No, Eleanor," I said, for some unknown reason accentuating my Bronx accent, and then I realized I had just shit on the floor. Nobody talked to me after that. A gorgeous girl floated by, her evenly tanned skin glistening in a white bikini. She had small, compact breasts, not big ones like me. "You have Mediterranean breasts," my mother would reassure me. "Men like them." "But, Ma, we come from Poland." "Nonsense," she shrugged. "That's recent. Do you really think Jews always came from that dinky place?" But I was unappeased. I knew clothes were only made for small-breasted women. I already knew everything was against me. I was doomed to failure and insignificance. Like when I finally got a part playing Joan of Arc instead of the kooky girl next door who made wisecracks and never got the boy. Unfortunately, it was a TV pilot for children, and I wouldn't get a chance to burn at the stake. But I figured I could strut around like the tomboy I fancied myself and take flying leaps onto horses, which wasn't so smart, really, since the only time I was ever on a horse, he leaped up and down trying to behead me on the barn rafters. He was obviously enraged to get me instead of one of the other girls who was smooth and proficient at riding horses, like all classy girls were in those days before soccer. And he was supposed to be the gentlest horse of the bunch, a mild old guy who wouldn't hurt a fly. Anyway, I would deal with that hurdle when I came to it. Meanwhile, I spent my rehearsal time arguing with the director, who was a moron. He insisted that I look up at the sky a lot and act holy. "Piety, my dear," he would say, "piety." "But Joan was a farm girl," I insisted. "She pitched hay and rode horses. She led an army into battle and won. The same part came later." But he was hopelessly stubborn. My luck would never change. I finally get a chance to play a great role, and this idiot is cramping my style. Nobody would even notice me. He was turning me into a bore, a heroine for nuns to torment Irish orphans into submission. There wouldn't be a French bone left in poor Joan's body. That did it. He says it one more time and I quit. He said it, I quit. But you never can tell when your luck will turn and suddenly a sure failure morphs into a splendid win. Like that time I was given free passes to attend the Art Students League annual costume ball. I don't know why I wore what I did. I guess to me it seemed like a costume. A white heavy brocade mid-calf dress with fine lace applique and a bouffant wired petticoat underneath, so the skirt swelled out like a bell. I left my long hair hanging straight down my back instead of in my usual ponytail, and I wore small red velvet pumps. I think I had some white flowers in my hair. I felt like Alice in Wonderland. I went with my mother, and I think Chaim and Rini Gross. Maybe Chaim got us the invitations. Somehow I recall the whole event taking place on the stage of a great Broadway theater, but I don't know how they could fit the tables and dance floor on a single stage. It was a big, rowdy crowd. The only costume I remember was on a hefty, handsome black woman with a loud laugh. Her dress was the hit of the evening, long and tight-fitting emerald green silk, stretching around her large curves with a dropped window on her very naked, framed butt, which she wiggled around as she danced frenetically all night. The exuberant chutzpah of her dress, that confident in-your-face butt, was the hit of the show. All the artists wanted to dance with her, and I was overwhelmed by my own invisibility in the face of this hedonistic eruption. So embarrassed by my innocuous dress, so out of my league, I wanted to hide in the bathroom, but my mother would have come looking for me and dragged me back, and then I would really die of humiliation. I was sure everybody thought I was a bourgeois idiot, a stupid kid without a clue, a demure little girl with the sexuality of a small toad. I looked so innocent and out of place, a doll in the midst of rakish bohemia. But out of the blue, a group of about 15 or 20 young cadets from the Naval Academy, Annapolis, I think, came in. I guess they were visiting Sodom for the weekend and had somehow wangled tickets to the crazy artist ball. Under those brimmed hats and buzz cuts, their ears stood out vulnerable and absurd. In the real world, I wouldn't even look at guys like that. But this night, not unlike me, they were children of a foreign country, or maybe we possessed a more subtle sense of theater, because those cadets took one look at me and lined up in a row as if they were at a cotillion waiting for their turn to dance with me. I never stopped dancing that night. I was Cinderella without a deadline. I was the belle of the ball within the ball, a debutante at my coming out party. Chaim was hysterical with laughter at the absurd perfection of our theater. My mother was relieved that I didn't take off with some disreputable character, and my first and only ball turned into a triumph. That's what luck is like. It can turn on a dime. I'm sure that the stories I lived in this book would not have happened if it weren't for a stubborn, unknown, middle-aged woman who many years ago happened to be in the same car of the same train when my toddler sister ran out at the 42nd Street station and my mother instinctively ran after her. Unfortunately, the incoming crowd pushed me back into the car and the door closed on me before I could get out. A woman took my hand as the train surged on its way and the rush hour crowd closed around me. "We'll get off at the next stop," she said. "Your mother will come and find you there." But a man who had also seen what happened leaned over from his seat and, flashing a card from his wallet, said he was from the FBI and would wait with me at the next station. The woman kept my hand in hers. "It's fine," she said. "I'm a school teacher. I'll wait with her." At 50th Street, the train stopped and the woman and the man both got off with me. We stood on the platform waiting for my mother while the crowd surged around us. He explained that he was in law enforcement and school was over. "Why don't you just go home? You must be tired. It's late." But she wouldn't leave. "I'm a school teacher," she said again. "We'll wait." We waited a long time. Trains came in, but without my mother and sister. The FBI man showed me his hand. He was missing 2 fingers. I didn't like him, though he was very friendly, but I didn't like him. As time passed and Mother didn't come, I hoped the lady wouldn't leave me, because if she did, I would have stayed with that FBI man and gone home with him wherever he took me, even though I didn't like him. I was 7 years old. The school teacher looked at her watch. "It's been a half hour," she said. "Her mother must be waiting back on 42nd Street. I'll call the police." "Oh, I'll take her to the station," the FBI man said. "There's one 2 blocks from here." But the woman held her ground. "We'll find a phone," she said. The FBI man followed us up the steps, but she couldn't find a phone booth and went through the stile, still holding my hand, and told the man in the change booth what had happened. He said he'd call the cops. The woman said she'd wait. When I looked up, the FBI man was gone. We waited, and when the police came, she handed me over to them and paid another fare and went back down to the trains. The cops took me to the station and showed me a jail cell, which was very interesting, and they got me a chocolate ice cream cone with sprinkles. I sat on a desk and ate my cone. They were very nice. Suddenly, my mother rushed into the station with my sister. She was crying and couldn't stop hugging me. She said, "We're going home now. Say goodbye to the nice policeman." I shook hands with everybody like a grown-up and said goodbye. They gave me a badge and said I was now a member of the junior police. We went back down to the subway and rode home. I wore my badge. The year before, the dismembered parts of the body of little Susan Dengen had been found in trash cans on the other side of Marshallou Parkway where we lived. It was very scary, especially that part about different pieces of her found in different places. She was only a year younger than me. A year later, in another time, in another place, I was luckier. Years later, I remembered the story and asked Comrade Stalin about luck. Only by then I was calling it chance. He shook his head and told me a story. One day a poor peasant finds a purse with a lot of money in the street. He's rich, he's happy. He rents many more acres from the Tsar. Nature is kind to him. The next year he has a great wheat crop. But when the market in wheat unexpectedly drops very low, he can't afford to pay the rent to the Tsar. He loses his farm and starves to death. Such are the inexorable conditions of the unjust feudal system to which he belongs. He wags his finger in the air for emphasis. In the short run, chance plays a part, but in the long run, it is annulled by the force of the iron laws of historical necessity. But comrade, for any given event, aren't there so many things that could have happened instead? A friend of mine visiting London looked to the left at a crossing and was killed by a motorcycle coming from the right. In that situation, there were only two possibilities, Stalin said. He could only have looked to the left or the right before stepping off the curb. He was a careless man, your friend. Couldn't he have tripped on the curb and broken his ankle and then fallen in love with the emergency room doctor and married her and moved to London, I asked. But he didn't, Stalin said. I wish he had, I said sadly. You are a sophist, he reprimanded me. Now, I would normally actually read another chapter, but I think we're having a conversation, Michael and me. So maybe that's enough reading. Thank you. Don't worry.
Talked before.
Well, we've never met,
No, we never.
but we knew about each other, and we're all, and of course him and his wonderful group, and all the people from File, General Idea. I remember from far away in California, we didn't know, I mean, I knew Mr. Peanut. I didn't know, that's Victor Trasov, right?
That's right.
Yes, I didn't know. I think I met him once, but I don't think, actually, I may not have. But I always used to teach in my classes. I always used to talk about Mr. Peanut. And I love the fact that he got so many votes.
You had a show with M.L. Dark.
Oh, he
way
did?
back
So did
when.
I.
Yes. And Vincent had a show there with Vince Peanut right at that time. That I think Leslie Bean organized it, and
It would have been, what's
this
her
would be-
name, who had one of the first people to
Dennis
distribute it.
Dennis
Dennis
Hopkins,
was in
yeah.
it, and
Dennis was there.
yeah, and Alan Capro and me, and that very interesting artist who somehow, Robert Welch, remember? He did
Yes, yes, right.
And then I didn't know, see, because the gallery was on 57th Street on New York.
Right.
And I was in California. So
Right.
I came in for my show. Were they getting I was getting a stipend. Were they getting a stipend too?
No, we didn't get
Oh. That's not fair. The Americans got stipends.
No, we didn't.
Do you know what happened to her?
But no, she went to, well, Leslie Bean said that she was interested, she became more interested in the cinema and
Yeah, she got,
supporting
in theater.
Charles.
She had a new boyfriend.
Yes. And then went
He was a
into-
producer, or wanted to be.
Yes.
So she backed a couple of plays, and the thing was, I'm sorry, this is gossip, but this is really interesting. This woman was the heiress to one of those soap fortunes or something.
Yeah, I can't remember all
Yeah,
the
it
stories
was,
with it
like
now,
Ivory
but,
Soap or something. And she was married to a psychiatrist named Dark, D''ARC, and then she accused him, she applied for a divorce because she said he was trying to murder her. And there was this huge, do you remember that? Maybe it was just in the American press, it was a huge thing all over the place. And then she went off with her producer and lost interest in art.
That's right.
Yes, and I don't know. I know she died
was introduced
subsequently.
to Charlton Heston, I think.
Oh, that's Moses. Well, that's
Something
impressive.
like that.
I didn't know that part.
But it was kind of like in those days. I mean, we all kind of knew each other. We were all the same generation.
Yes.
And up and down the coast. I mean, we knew every up and down the coast where where everybody would come through, like the ant farmers would be coming by or whatever.
Yes.
Lowell Darling would be coming around.
Yes.
Whatever.
Oh,
We knew
yes,
everybody up
yes.
and down the coast. And
I think Lowell Darling may have gotten the idea to run for governor of California from Mr. Peanut. I think Mr. Peanut came first.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, Lowell,
Yeah.
and Mr. Peanut ran for governor of, was it Vancouver? Or, no,
Mayor of
mayor of Vancouver. Yeah. And he got a lot of votes, like 30,000 or something, I think.
but he got just under 5% of the.
Oh, well,
thing.
that's
it would have been,
kind of impressive. I don't think Romney got too much more. But Lowell Darling actually got. Do you remember he had a stick with a glove on the end of it, and he would hold out that stick and shake people's hands? It was an interesting artwork.
And I keep on looking at these videos here with these old videos of that, and it keeps on coming around with Terry Fox. His face comes up there.
Yes.
It's right after you're looking. You're in the zoo here when there's a rat coming to eat something there, and then this.
That's Bonnie Shirk
in
in the zoo who had dinner with the tiger.
Yeah, but Terry Fox is there in that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I keep on showing his face, and I thought, God, that's a face from way back when.
Yes, yeah, he died.
Yeah, I know. And we both went. We were in Berlin at the same time. Vincent and I and Terry Fox, and there were various other people at that time. But we were all had DR Day. We were all in Berlin at the DR Day there, 1981.
I don't remember the years.
We did some gigs there, and in Cologne with Herzengrath. Remember when he was in Cologne, and there was it was Mr. Video in Germany.
Yes, they loved him. Yeah.
And then we never really thought, because in the beginning of the Western Front, like before the Western Front, we were the Image Bank, and there was all of that stuff. And then when we started the Image Bank, there was like Willoughby Sharp just arrived, like boom, and just moved in. This was.
I didn't know.
And we
that.
just started that, and then so it was doing the last Avalanche magazine.
Oh, so he covered the whole general idea and everything.
He covered the Western Front, and there the last issue of Avalanche.
I remember. I knew Willoughby, and he never. I remember in those days being very hurt, and usually that means pissed off with me, that he didn't write about any of my work. And he was he didn't have to write about it, but somebody else would have, but he would never mention it in Avalanche. And all my friends, everybody else, Vito, everybody was all over the place.
Yes, right.
But not me, the bad lady from California.
Yes, and then there was because Lisa Bear came into the picture. And
yes, but that's because
she was sort of.
Yeah, but she would be there. But that's because she was the girlfriend of somebody. But I'm not putting her down. It's just that's why Willoughby.
I know, but I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But the thing is that we really all sort of. Nowadays it's I don't know. It's another. I lived in Germany for almost 20 years, and you reinvent yourself again.
I didn't know you did.
All these things that you like.
So you were in Berlin?
I lived there for 18 years.
Yeah,
I came back to look after my mom.
That's really lively scene.
Yeah, but it was, and you saw the collapse of communism. And
Oh, you were there?
I was there for all that moment.
Oh, exciting.
And,
my stepfather was in tears, but
it was, but it's something that all of a sudden that you something that you take for granted your whole life has been part of it, and you see it dissolve in literally days. In 3 days, it was over.
I know.
Everything
It's like it was made
gone.
of paper.
It was just poof, gone,
Yeah.
you know. Well, the problems start.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway.
yeah, now there's new ones.
Yeah.
It's all gone.
But anyway, here we are now.
Yeah, we made it. We survived.
And this is your first time in Vancouver?
No, I was in Vancouver with, I don't think I was there at the gallery. Claudia and... I did a performance. At the Western Front, that's right. I think I did a King performance.
We showed Eleanor Antin in the boots.
Yes. And I did a performance, a King performance there, I remember. It was this sort of big barn-like place that they lived in. It was really cool, I liked it. Yeah, but otherwise, no. I was in Montreal. As I told the guy at Customs, he says, were you ever in Canada? I said, many, many years ago in Montreal. I forgot that I had been here also many, many years ago. And, or maybe I was just sort of kidding with him. And he said, oh, now you're in the good part.
Okay. But we both had the love of postcards.
Ah, yes.
You know.
Well, actually, General Idea did, I still have that box that you guys was.
Yeah, that's we did.
Yes,
those,
it was,
we
but they were
published those,
smaller than
yeah.
my postcards had been. And I gave you a 100 Boots postcard with that I had never published anywhere, because when the boots were lined up facing the sea, that was the first picture we took, a dog just wandered onto the beach, went and stood right at the end, I think on the right-hand side,
right, yeah.
and shat.
Yeah.
And we got that. He's exactly in a straight line with the boots, like 101 boots.
Yeah.
And I gave you that picture. I love it.
Yeah. That's a great picture.
We have around 50 of the cards in the Morse Trezor archive, so I brought a few. If you want to read them.
Yeah.
We can
Oh,
talk.
oh, dear Michael, don't you love me anymore? Oh, why? What?
I do.
And then, okay, and then, oh, then you have one for Image Bank. Why did I say this? Are you married? Can I marry you off together? Oh, I see it. Do you love each other? My hand hurts. I don't know. This is obviously in relation
I'll read the
to
rest of
some
this,
work.
if you want. So this continues with an afterthought from Eleanor in pink. Dear Michael, don't you love me anymore? Eleanor. You do. Just got the catalog. Beautiful. I'm on my way to New York for 2 weeks. We'll write later. I'm showing in Nova Scotia in February.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Kiss
So
little
73,
Michael and the nut
yeah.
for me.
73.
The nut
that's-
is, you know
that,
who.
73. That's when we started the Western Front, when everything started to go really crazy.
But, you know, is that when I mailed it in 70?
This is 1971. The story.
I must
it
have
was
seen
right
the
at beginning.
one of the big catalogs, or one of the magazines, or
Yeah, well, you know.
magazine. It must have been.
The gosh, you know these. You know, in 1971 was the 100th anniversary of the picture postcard.
Oh, I didn't know, really.
And, you know, the whole thing with the Image Bank was, you know, like with Exchange and we wanted to, you know, you could do anything in a postcard. And we were networking, you know, and so networks are important with postcards.
Of course.
And so and we wanted to kind of acknowledge our activities and make it an event out of it. And we talked the director of the gallery here of UBC.
Here? Was it the Belkin?
The Belkin. It wasn't the Belkin. It was just a Fine Arts Gallery, UBC, Alvin Belkin. And that we put together a show of artists' postcards, you know, I think that, and we would publish. And we
Was
would
that
do
when you did
as
the
a catalog
little
of
box?
that. Yeah, the box. And there were 2 editions of that. And, and then that show was fortunate. Then afterwards, it was circulated. The show was circulated with the National Gallery, so it went everywhere.
Of Canada?
Of Canada, and we still have that collection. It's a great holding, it's a beautiful stuff like that. And then but of course this was, I mean, the 100 Boots series. I mean, it's really one of the classic things of that period, of that time, of the use of the posts, and I mean, it's just really classic.
And you could never
stuff.
do it now, because if you notice,
no,
this is a 6-cent stamp.
Yes, it's 8 cents. This is 8 cents.
Well, in the middle, of it, it was 6
it was 6
at first.
Cents.
Then they raised it to 8. I was very, very furious.
You can't make art for 6 cents now.
Yes, I know.
I know.
Of course, you could do it for free on the internet, I suppose.
Yeah, you
but
can,
it's different than getting something in the mail.
I mean, imagine
in your
if
hands.
we were doing what we were doing with all of that stuff.
I'm
now it would have
old-fashioned.
been impossible if we'd done that. I don't know what we would have been. We would have ended up being Google or something if we.
Exactly. But of course, there's some. I mean, there are things about that that are very fortunate, that people can reach audiences so incredibly and interact. That is, if you want to. You may not want to interact, but I know that sounds shocking, but it's possible.
Well, the other thing is too that you really became the friends with a generation, and all that, and it came from all over. So, I mean, there were lots of people from Eastern Europe, which we started corresponding with, which I had no idea of what that really meant for those people at that time until I went to Berlin in '81, where a lot of people lived in East Germany and this, that, and Poland and that, and I mean, all we were doing was showing postcard shows, doing invitations for postcard shows, but that saved people from going to prison, because there was always the artists were there, without the official artists, but if they were known by people in the West.
Would that make them? They would be suspicious, but wouldn't the Russians know when they sent when they got the mail?
It saved them from not being, for not being thrown into prison. Or
whatever. Oh, I see, because
people knew them in the West, and so it gave them a different thing around. So, and I had no idea of that until 1981 when I lived into Berlin. And so there were little things like that which never had an idea, no thought about of that, in the original things when we were addressing the world, I mean, that was a very much part of the thing. I mean, the history of Canadian art, it's a short one, and most of it has been involved with landscape. And we're kind of the first generation.
You mean like 19th century? Like our Hudson River painters?
You've heard of the Group of Seven.
See, I don't know that history.
All of that went on. Well, it still does.
I see.
Anyway, so...
Does anyone want to... Yeah, that's just... You don't have to talk about that time, because if you could talk about this time, or
How much of conversation with Stalin is true?
Now that's an interesting question. As I suggested when I read about being with the nuns, and I was there because my parents had no money and it was like a charity camp or something. But that I had in my mind changed that memory, because it was really when I stayed with my cousin when my mother brought me home, and he was such a sweet, dear person to me, and he was the one, because his mother was always playing mahjong, who must have, bathed me and, put me to bed. And I was a little girl, and it was fine. I know he didn't do anything to me, but there was something that I think I remembered as a very sweet, lovely thing. And it's just a tonality. and there was a sensuality to it, and there was a love and whatever. And I put it together with this other thing, like as if the nuns would have a young man. Well, my cousin was about 16, I guess, and I guess this kid in my mind was about 13 or 14. You know, so it's interesting how when you have memories, you put things together metaphorically, you know, like with meanings, but sometimes it's two or three together. So because of the meaning of it, and it gets played out, and maybe I also, there must have been no way that anything like that could happen, and the pleasure and the sweetness, but at the same time, children know so quickly that, like maybe this is a little bad or something. Not because they're born that way, but because it's there all around them, and it's like osmosis, they take it all in. So a little guilt, I'm thinking, mostly pleasure. And that's all right, there's a little guilt you can live with as long as it's not too much. But basically, what can I say? Then also, I'm an artist. I start writing a memory I have, and I'm also a writer, an artist, and somehow you tell a story and it starts to play out and become a scene, and you have to go with the artwork, right? So that's what I tell my students. Yeah, you can prepare plan from today till tomorrow. You start a work, and then at some point the work starts to talk to you, and it has its own life. I mean, if it is interesting work. And it leads you, where it wants to go. Now, if, say, it's very politically important to you, or even artistically important for you to have it mean certain things, you can fight with it a little, or lead it a little here and let it go a little there, but you can't close your mind to what the fucking thing wants to say. It's alive now. And that's what happens when you are you're writing a scene. It's you, it's your experience, but at the same time, it's opening. And basically, it's all true. Do I remember exactly? I have many more memories. Some of them may even be better than these, but these are the ones that followed, and they have a kind of poetry, like sisters. My talk about my sisters started with the nuns, and then it became, I knew I wanted to write about my sister, and for some reason I went right into the nuns, and then moved in, to the other things with my sister. So there is a poetry also that starts to, when you feel free with your medium, that you can play and you can let go.
But it's interesting that you're doing a memoir now at
Yes.
Because I think, despite whatever your interests and whatever it is, you're part of the moment now. The art that you work is now.
Yes.
It's always is going to be.
Well, you have to do that.
It's always only
yes.
that.
Yes.
But as you get, as we get older, you do have memoirs, you do have ideas, you do have, and other times you see what periods were completely different, how they did end,
yes.
and how you've been through it, you've seen it, and it is amazing that I think it's rather nice to have that kind of those thoughts. I've been thinking about this. I wish that Vincent was here, because his really was, he grew up, and his father was a total communist, totally believed in the, and went to Russia when he went to, in high school, he went into Russia, and he was very sad at the end of East Germany. The end of that, he collects all the bits and pieces of memories of that period.
Yeah.
And I mean, he has no illusions about but at the same time.
Yes, because it was a beautiful dream.
Yeah,
and it got
that
fucked.
dream of that
yes.
ideal of that
but
is
it's,
still.
You know, it's
important
very,
for him.
I'm glad you
Yeah.
told me this.
Yeah.
Tell him for me that when, I don't know if any of, I'm sure many of you remember, but the younger people will not, but first they let the people out for a day, do you remember? Through the wall, East Germany. It was still, the wall wasn't broken, it was still its own country or whatever. And the people came out, and the West Germans gave everybody 15 marks, or I don't know.
100 marks.
100 marks. And the people went mad. The people from East Berlin. They went mad because they went and you couldn't buy a television for that, but you could buy, you know, things that they had never
you
seen.
almost could. You could buy everything.
Really? See, I don't know
Immediately was 99 marks.
Well,
Everything was there. There was, and then there was the black market immediately.
oh, that's true. Yeah, I didn't
And everything
even know
went in
but
their
I would
little
think.
cars, and their cigarette, their television sets were bigger than their cars, and all of them they were going to go from East Berlin to Vladivostok across the country. That everything was going there, and everything was 99 marks. It was cruel.
Well, it is.
But the thing about you see, the thing is, it was they were perpetually, the press was always saying, when will people be allowed to leave and to just go to West Berlin, and a lot of those people from the official people in East Germany, they weren't used to people asking or demanding things or questions, and they really, you know, so there was a kind of like it was really just one evening, and the media just picked up on it, and they said, you know, and the man said, well, if you want to leave, you can leave now, you know, and that was announced, and it was announced on the radio, and the word got out, and I was there on that, and I lived on the Kurfürstendamm, just off the Kurfürstendamm, and it was the main street where everything came into, and I almost missed that because I was in Budapest the week before with friends there to see the first week of the First Republic, and seen all that chaos, and I really got back 2 nights before the wall came down.
But I think they let them out first, and they had to come back.
No. It just sort of happened, and it was like at 6 in the evening, and in the news they said, if people want to leave, they can leave now, and people just took them by their word, and the guards. They didn't do anything wrong. They just allowed people to go through.
You see, now this is in relation to what.
And people started coming around midnight, and the word was kind of going out. And I went down to the street, and you saw the people were petrified. They didn't know. They were like, you know.
You mean the East Germans who were out were petrified?
They were coming through, and then we all went upstairs, and we came back with bottles of wine and welcome. That was that first weekend. That weekend, everybody came, and everybody was given 100 marks and a map, and everything was free. All the theaters and the cinemas and the transport,
for them,
everything was there. Everything was free, and the beer companies and that they opened it. Everything was free. It was crazy. It went that for about. Well, it was like about the first 3 months of that.
You see, Michael, I remember it, and this is not unrelated to what you were asking about memory. Yeah. I remember it. I was on the road somewhere. I don't know. All my life I've been on the road somewhere, so I don't even know where I was. I was in a hotel room. And I was watching it on TV, and I was no longer, you know, like I was never a communist. What did I know? I mean, I'm not someone who reads boring, long texts like Karl Marx. Okay, but you know, but I had known already that there was something. Even though I looked behind me every time I said something bad about Stalin, because I thought You know, not that he'd kill me, but that I felt guilty. You know. But I remember sitting in that hotel room. That's why I thought they just were let out for a day, and then they went back, and then the wall came down later. So I've already mixed that up if I was writing about that in my book. But I also was crying because I found it disgusting. Now, I can go and, you know, I'm fortunate. I've, you know, made money and taught and whatever. So I can go into a store and buy something. I can buy a flat screen TV. I can do all of these things. So how do I know what it's like if you can't have any of these things? If you have an ancient iron and you have to iron your clothes or something, I mean, that can make you crazy if you have to keep doing that over and over. I can understand that. So who am I even to be disgusted by this? But I found it disgusting. And that all they wanted to do is buy things. But as I say it from someone who can always go out and buy things. So, you know, there's you know, I mean, it's a complex issue, but there was something, and I found it disgusting because not only do I hate to shop, it's not even related to that, it's that it had been a beautiful dream, and it was so obviously shitty, and these people, all they want to do is buy things. So, and I was crying alone in my hotel room. Just tears rolling down my face, looking at these people with the joy on their face. I wasn't even happy for them. And even though I knew that it was a shitty government, and I mean, I knew that the communist thing had fucked over, it was nothing to do with communism. So, when you say he sees that, you said Vincent sees this with a certain, you know, collecting all this material, certain, there's something melancholy about it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Definitely.
there is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
it's a very, that's memory and that's history and whatever. Okay, are there any other?
Yeah. I was wondering what's your experience reading these and where you live?
Could you talk a little bit louder?
Sure. I was wondering what your experience reading these are. And sorry, my tone is a little bad. This is the
You know, I do have a couple of hearing aids, so I'm still having trouble. If you could, is that okay for you? She comes a little closer.
I was wondering what's your experience when you're reading these, and
Ah.
I was wondering if you imagine yourself in the environment and whether you see yourself from an outside perspective or you see everything from your own body. What's your experience?
Well, that's an interesting question. If you notice, sometimes I have to force myself not to break down, and there are other times too. Some of the memories are quite profound for me, and like the way I nearly got, you know, obviously I thought that FBI man was obviously going to, you know, do horrible things to me. I mean, now when I realize it, that, you know, that he was a you know, a murderous, rapist, serial killer monster. Okay. And whenever I think, because that was the first time when I knew of something horrible like a murder, nowadays the kids are always going bang, 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 you know, and then they wonder why they shoot somebody and the person doesn't stand up, you know. But I knew about this little girl being found in all different places. And this is another thing that's curious. Oh, it freaked me out. It has always freaked me out. And the name, I have never forgotten her name, Little Susan Dengen. She's never Susan Dengen. She's Little Susan Dengen to me. And I was reading this beautiful book by Joan Didion. It's not the first book about her disastrous life over the last few years, but it's the second one about her daughter. And she mentions Susan Dengen, the murder of this little girl, and it happened in Chicago. And I remember in my mind, I was very little, I remember it happening across the park for me in the Bronx. I figured she's a journalist, I mean, she's a very good writer, but she's also a journalist, and she probably looked it up. She probably knew that it happened in Chicago. But I still say it happened in the Bronx. But how do I feel? Well, there is something about 100 Boots when I read this, because I have a publisher, and it's going to come out soon, but at first I had a very good agent who showed this book to various of the standard publishing companies, who actually, a number of them really liked it a lot, or maybe some of them didn't like the Stalin part, some of them liked that, didn't like something else, some of them got bored in the middle. Other people really liked it, but they all said, we can't publish this. It's, for one thing, most of them, those who knew me as an artist, and I'm not an artist here, I'm an actor in some of the things, because I was an actor at first. And so that confused them. And then they also, they didn't, I wasn't, I hadn't saved myself from drugs, I wasn't a human bondage, all of these things that are supposed to make an interesting life, okay? So I took the book away from her, and then actually was going to go to a big outfit, a big art outfit. I don't want to talk about it now, because I've just recently taken from them and given it to somebody else, because the other people are too slow. But I figured I don't have to wait to be appreciated or whatever, liked by, a bunch of suits sitting in a publishing company. I can go out to the public and to the people and bring my book, just like I did with 100 Boots. I don't want to sit around waiting for, for some gallery to like my, weird work. I mean, that's what they thought. And so I just decided that I would go out and read it and, share it with people. And normally we don't have a conversation. I don't meet, someone from my old world, and we talk, the audience and me, we talk, but this has been incredibly fun for me this way. But I am writing my last memoir. There is a great pleasure when you're used to being with so many people all the time, like in your work, like in my Roman pictures. I have 30, 40 actors that I'm acting with in each picture, and that I'm, photographing. And there's a great pleasure of sitting in your studio, and just being by yourself. But I'm going to write the rest of my life in art, which is the title actually of Stanislavski's autobiography, the great theater actor and theorist, and my life in art, and it will be most of my life. It'll be almost half a century managing to survive in the art world, and it will be nasty and vicious and all the things that people who deserve it will get it. And I don't know if finally they'll let me publish it that way, because lawyers come into this, but I'll somehow insist that people know who this is. I mean, people in the know anyway will know if they don't let you mention names all the time. I mean, there have been wonderful people I've met too, but it is a very, well, you know what the art world is like. Yes, it's very murderous, and if you're a young artist, you should know that. At the same time, it's very, it's so freeing, and there's wonderful people, and there's great things you can do, because you're making art. That's one of the great professions. To me, it's the great one. But at the same time, you have to navigate and survive in a very nasty, unpleasant world. I don't know if it's any more unpleasant than any other world, but in our world. But it is certainly extremely, and it's very hard to survive.
We've worked it.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
I know.
I think it's fitting to end on that promissory note from Eleanor. Thank you, Eleanor and Michael, very much for being here this evening.